Chapter 1. A Mission Gone Awry. The Galactic Federation often had strange tasks for its agents, but when Daniel Freeman, a young and experienced human diplomat, was assigned to visit the enigmatic planet of Vatal, he knew this mission would be different. Vatal was home to the Varani, a race that had remained isolated for centuries, only recently opening their borders after an ancient treaty was suddenly reactivated. The Federation was cautious, eager to form diplomatic ties, and they chose Daniel to serve as a cultural bridge between humans and the Varani. The Varani were a race shrouded in mystery. They were renowned for their striking beauty, formidable strength, and a culture deeply rooted in traditions that outsiders found nearly impossible to decipher. All previous encounters had hinted at a society both welcoming and guarded, as if they were testing the waters with every interaction. Daniel's mission was simple: establish peaceful communication, build trust, and pave the way for future alliances. But he knew that anything could go wrong in a place as unpredictable as Vatal. His diplomatic vessel landed gently on a grassy, crystalline landing pad surrounded by towering trees with glowing, sapphire-colored leaves. The sky above shimmered with streaks of purple and blue as unfamiliar stars blinked in the distance. Daniel took a deep breath, stepping out into the thick, fragrant air that carried the scent of alien flowers and a hint of something metallic. A group of Varani awaited him, led by their ambassador, a tall and elegant woman named Zarithra. Zarithra's presence was both commanding and otherworldly. Her violet skin shimmered under the alien sun, and her silver eyes betrayed no emotion as she greeted him in perfect galactic common, her words punctuated with a musical rhythm unique to her people. As Daniel introduced himself, bowing in the manner he had been taught, he couldn't shake the feeling that the ambassador was studying him far more closely than he was observing her. Daniel was escorted to his guest quarters, a chamber that floated gently above the ground with walls made of semi-transparent material that seemed to shift color with his mood. His first night on Vatal was uneventful, but it gave him a chance to absorb the surroundings. A soft glow emanated from bioluminescent plants that decorated the chamber, and the distant hum of alien creatures filled the air, creating an ambience that was both soothing and unnerving. The next morning, he met his guide, Elyra, a young Varani woman who had been chosen to help him navigate the complexities of their society. Elyra was unlike any other Varani he had seen. She was youthful, with a curious smile that seemed to soften the serious atmosphere of the diplomatic mission. She asked him countless questions about Earth, human history, and the Galactic Federation, her silver eyes wide with curiosity. In return, Daniel asked about the Varani and their culture, but her answers were often vague, revealing only what he suspected were the safest details. The first week was a whirlwind of diplomatic meetings, cultural tours, and introductions to Varani officials. Despite Elyra's efforts to guide him, Daniel found himself bewildered by their customs, especially when he made an embarrassing mistake. During a formal ceremony, he reached out to shake hands with a dignitary, a gesture that was apparently seen as an insult in Varani culture. The room fell silent, and a chill swept over the gathering. Elyra was quick to cover for him, explaining to the dignitary that human customs were different and that Daniel had meant no offense. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had crossed an invisible line. That night, alone in his chamber, he pored over the Federation's cultural guide on the Varani, but the text seemed insufficient, full of broad generalizations and outdated information. He felt like he was groping in the dark, every gesture and word a potential landmine. As the days turned to weeks, Daniel became increasingly aware that he was being observed not just by Elyra, but by everyone. The Varani were friendly on the surface, but there was always an undercurrent of something else, as if they were evaluating him. Elyra was his constant companion, and although she was kind and patient, there was an unspoken barrier between them, a formality that he couldn't breach. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings, Elyra invited him to a secluded garden in the heart of the capital city. It was a place of quiet beauty, filled with flowers that glowed faintly in the dark and fountains that seemed to sing as water cascaded down crystalline steps. They sat together on a stone bench, and for the first time, Elyra seemed to drop her formal demeanor. She spoke candidly about the fears of her people, their worries about the future, about change, and the uncertainties of joining the Galactic Federation. Daniel listened, feeling for the first time that they were truly connecting. Just as he thought they were finally beginning to understand each other, Eliara's expression turned serious. Her eyes, usually bright with curiosity, became intense as she leaned slightly closer to him. "Daniel," she said in a soft but steady voice, "I have a request. Would you touch my breast?" Daniel froze, his mind racing as he tried to process her words. There was no hint of humor or playfulness in her eyes, only a calm expectation. His first thought was that he had misheard, that the translator had somehow malfunctioned, but the look on her face told him otherwise. She was completely serious, and he suddenly felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a stone. "Eliara, I don't understand," he managed to stammer, struggling to keep his voice steady. "What do you mean?" She blinked, her expression shifting to one of mild confusion, as if she didn't understand why he was so flustered. "It is a gesture of trust," she explained calmly. "Among the Varani, touching the heart crest is a sign of respect and sincerity. It is how we show that we are willing to be vulnerable." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as he realized what she was asking. For the Varani, the center of the chest, the heart crest, was not considered intimate in the way it was for humans. It was a symbol of one's emotional core, and to touch it was to demonstrate openness and honesty. But for him, the gesture was profoundly intimate, something reserved for lovers or family. Taking a deep breath, he tried to find the right words. For humans, touching that area is very personal. It's something we only do with people we are very close to. Eliara's eyes widened, and a faint blush spread across her cheeks, turning her violet skin a deeper shade. "Oh," she exclaimed, genuinely surprised. "I had no idea it was so intimate for you. I apologize if I have made you uncomfortable." "No," Daniel said quickly, his voice softening. "You didn't. I'm just trying to understand. This is why I'm here, right? To learn about each other's cultures." She gave him a small, hesitant smile, her embarrassment slowly fading. "Yes," she agreed, her voice gentle. "To learn. I suppose we both have much to discover." They sat in silence for a moment, the tension easing as they looked out over the glowing garden. Daniel felt a new bond forming between them, one born not from formal diplomacy, but from a genuine effort to understand one another. It was a small step, but it felt significant. Yet even as they spoke of trust and cultural exchange, he couldn't shake the feeling that the stakes had suddenly become much higher, and that this mission would test him in ways he had never expected. Chapter 2. Navigating the Unknown. The days following Eliara's surprising request were a blur of political meetings, cultural exchanges, and diplomatic receptions. Yet, the encounter in the garden lingered in Daniel's mind, a pivotal moment that seemed to change the course of his mission. Eliara remained by his side, as she always had, but their interactions now felt different, more open, yet tinged with an unspoken tension. Daniel had thought he'd adjusted to the customs of the Varani, but he was quickly proven wrong. He learned that their society was as complex and layered as the floating cities that dotted Vatal's vast jungles. Despite his extensive training, he often found himself struggling to interpret the subtext behind every conversation, every gesture. The incident in the garden had made one thing clear. He could no longer afford to rely on the Federation's inadequate briefings. He needed to understand the Varani on a deeper level. Late one evening, as a cold wind blew through the capital's crystalline towers, Eliara appeared at his chamber door, her expression serious. "Daniel," she said softly, "there's something I want to show you. It's time you see the real Vatal, beyond the diplomatic facade." He hesitated for a moment, sensing the gravity of her words. This felt like another test, another challenge that could either build or shatter the fragile trust they'd established. With a nod, he agreed, following her through the city's shadowy streets to a hidden entrance beneath a towering statue of a Varani warrior. They descended deep below the surface, the walls of the narrow passage glowing with faint blue veins of an unknown mineral. Finally, they emerged into a vast underground chamber filled with bioluminescent plants that cast an eerie, otherworldly glow. In the center of the chamber stood a large, circular stone altar surrounded by carvings that depicted ancient battles and celebrations. Eliara motioned for him to sit, and she took her place across from him. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and a sweet, floral fragrance that made his head swim. "This is a sacred place for my people," Eliara explained, her voice hushed. We call it the Hall of Echoes. It is where we come to meditate, to speak openly, and to connect with the spirits of our ancestors. Daniel's eyes widened, and he felt a sense of awe wash over him. It was clear that very few outsiders had ever been brought to this place. He sat down on the cold stone, feeling the weight of centuries of tradition around him. "Why did you bring me here?" he asked quietly. "Because I want you to understand," she said, her voice sincere. "Our ways are strange to you. I know that. But you need to see that the Varani are more than just the formalities and the ceremonies you've been shown. We are a people of honor, of history, and of deep connections." For the next few hours, Eliara told him the story of her people, the wars they had fought, the alliances they had forged, and the price they had paid to protect their world from outside influences. She spoke of their fear of change, of losing their identity, and the anxiety they felt as the galaxy grew smaller and more interconnected. Daniel listened, his earlier frustrations melting away as he began to grasp the depth of their culture. But as the conversation progressed, it became clear that Eliara had something else on her mind. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the stone floor as if searching for courage. "There is a reason why the Varani chose to stay isolated for so long," she said softly. "And there is a reason why we value trust above all else." Daniel waited, sensing that she was on the verge of revealing something important. "Our history is filled with betrayal," she admitted, her voice heavy with emotion. "We trusted other species, and we were deceived, used, and nearly destroyed. It took centuries to rebuild, to close ourselves off and regain our strength. Now, we are opening our borders once more, but the wounds of the past are still fresh. That is why I brought you here, Daniel, to prove that trust can be rebuilt." Daniel's heart ached at the vulnerability in her words. He had come to Vatal with the intention of forming a simple diplomatic bond, but now he saw that the task was much more profound. It was about healing, about reconciliation, and about breaking down the walls of isolation that had shielded the Varani for generations. Eliara stood, reaching out a hand to him. "Come with me. There is one more thing I must show you." He took her hand, and she led him deeper into the chamber, to a small alcove where a single crystal pulsed with a soft, white light. "This is the Heartstone of Vatal," she said reverently. "It is a relic from our ancestors, a symbol of our unity and resilience. It is said that those who touch it must do so with a pure heart, or face the consequences of their deceit." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine as he looked at the crystal, sensing the weight of expectation in her gaze. "What does it mean to touch it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Eliara's expression was solemn. To touch the Heartstone is to open oneself completely, to be judged not by what you say, but by what you feel. It is a test of sincerity, of true intent. If you wish to gain the trust of my people, you must pass this test. Daniel hesitated, the gravity of her words sinking in. This was the moment he had feared, the point of no return. If he touched the Heartstone and failed, his mission would be over, and he would lose any chance of forming a bond with the Varani. But if he succeeded, he would be one step closer to understanding them. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, his hand hovering inches above the crystal. Eliara watched him with bated breath, her expression unreadable. Finally, he placed his palm on the cool surface, feeling a strange warmth spread through his body. The chamber seemed to grow silent, the air thick with anticipation. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, he felt a surge of emotion, fear, hope, sorrow, and joy all flooding his mind at once. The Heartstone pulsed beneath his hand, and a faint glow spread from his palm to his fingertips. Daniel felt as if the crystal was peering into his very soul, examining every doubt, every fear, and every truth he held within. After what felt like an eternity, the light faded, and the warmth withdrew. Daniel pulled his hand back, his heart pounding, unsure of what he had experienced. He looked at Eliara, whose eyes were wide with wonder. She stepped forward, her expression softening as she reached out and touched his chest. Just above his heart, a gesture he now understood was one of deep respect. "You have passed," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "The Heartstone has accepted you, Daniel. You are now one of us." Relief and joy flooded him, and he felt a bond between them solidify, a connection that transcended words. They stood in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on them, until Lyra stepped back, her eyes shining with gratitude and something more, a hint of affection. As they made their way back to the surface, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that the Heartstone had not only tested him, but also revealed something profound about Lyra herself. He had seen a glimpse of her fears, her desires, and the hopes she held for her people. The diplomatic mission was no longer just about politics. It had become something deeply personal. He had passed the test, but he knew that his journey had only just begun. Chapter 3. Deepening Bonds and Hidden Secrets. The atmosphere in Vatal had shifted after the Heartstone's test. The once polite yet distant attitude of the Varani softened around Daniel, and he found himself welcomed in ways he had not experienced before. Invitations to social gatherings, ceremonial meals, and private discussions became frequent. Lyra was never far from his side, acting as both guide and companion, her demeanor noticeably warmer. There was a newfound sense of ease between them, an understanding that transcended the spoken word. Despite the progress, Daniel knew that his task was far from complete. The Varani, while more open now, still held back secrets, their cultural barriers firmly in place. Lyra seemed to be the key to unlocking them, yet she remained elusive, deflecting his more personal questions with a teasing smile. It was both frustrating and fascinating, and he found himself drawn to her, not just as a diplomat but as a person. One evening, while attending a celebration in honor of Vatal's renewal, their version of a new year, Daniel noticed Lyra's absence. The festivities were in full swing, with dancers twirling beneath the glowing canopies of bioluminescent trees, and musicians playing haunting melodies on instruments that looked as if they were alive. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Lyra never missed a formal event, especially one of such significance. He slipped away from the party, retracing his steps to the secluded garden where they had first had their deep conversation. The air was thick with the scent of nocturnal flowers, their petals opening to drink in the moonlight. He found Lyra there, sitting by the central fountain, her gaze lost in the rippling water. She looked vulnerable, her usual poise gone. "Lyra?" he called gently, approaching her slowly. "Why are you out here alone?" She looked up, and he was taken aback by the sadness in her eyes. "Daniel," she said softly, "I'm glad you're here. There's something I need to tell you, something I've been hiding." His heart skipped a beat, and he sat beside her, sensing that whatever she was about to reveal would be crucial. "What is it?" he asked, his voice calm despite the rising tension in his chest. For a moment, she hesitated, then took a deep breath. "There is a faction within our society, a group that opposes our integration with the Galactic Federation. They believe that opening our borders will weaken us, that we will lose our identity and become just another cog in a machine that doesn't understand us. They're powerful, and they're watching every move we make." Daniel's mind raced as he processed her words. He had suspected that there was resistance among the Varani, but to hear it confirmed sent a chill down his spine. "And what do they want?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "They want proof that humans are untrustworthy, that we should remain isolated," Lyra said, her expression conflicted. "They have been using me to test you, to see if you are worthy of our trust. If you had failed the Heartstone's test, they would have used it as evidence that humanity was unfit to be our allies." Daniel's eyes widened in shock. "So, everything we've done, every interaction, was a test?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "Not everything. I meant what I said in the Hall of Echoes. I brought you there because I wanted to trust you. I wanted to show you who we are, beyond the surface. But I was under pressure to follow their orders. If I had defied them completely, they would have cut me off, and you would never have seen the real Vatal." He stared at her, his emotions a whirlwind of confusion, betrayal, and compassion. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I believe in you, Daniel," she said fiercely, her voice breaking. "I believe that humanity and the Varani can coexist, that we can be allies. But the opposition will do anything to prevent that, and they are planning something that will ruin everything we've worked for if we don't stop them." Daniel's blood ran cold. "What are they planning?" he demanded, his tone urgent. Lyra hesitated, glancing around as if afraid they were being watched. "They're going to use the renewal ceremony," she said finally. "They plan to stage an incident, a diplomatic scandal that will make it appear as though you've betrayed us. They'll twist it to their advantage, and the Federation will lose all credibility with my people. Daniel's hands clenched into fists, his diplomatic training warring with the anger rising in his chest. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. Then we have to stop them, he said resolutely. Tell me what I need to do. Iliara's eyes softened, and she reached out to grasp his hand, squeezing it tightly. We can stop them together, she said, her voice filled with determination. But you have to trust me, Daniel. We will need to go to places that outsiders are not allowed. We will have to break rules that, if discovered, could ruin you. I trust you, he said without hesitation, his gaze never wavering. Whatever it takes. They spent the rest of the night huddled by the fountain, formulating a plan that would expose the faction's plot and secure a future for both their peoples. Iliara's knowledge of her society was invaluable, and Daniel relied on her completely, recognizing that his success depended on their cooperation. There was no room for doubt now. They were in this together. The following days were a blur of secret meetings, coded messages, and careful maneuvers through the sprawling capital. Iliara guided him to hidden archives, forbidden chambers, and long-forgotten passages beneath the city, where they pieced together the evidence they needed. Each step brought them closer to the truth, but it also brought them closer together, the bond between them deepening with every secret they uncovered. Finally, the night of the renewal ceremony arrived. The capital was aglow with lights, and the streets were filled with celebrations, the air thick with anticipation. Daniel stood in the grand hall alongside Iliara, both of them poised for what they knew would be the defining moment of their mission. He wore the ceremonial robes gifted to him, a sign of acceptance among the Varani. As she stood at his side, dressed in a shimmering gown that caught the light with every movement. As the ceremony began, Daniel scanned the crowd, searching for any sign of the conspirators. His nerves were on edge, and his instincts were honed to a razor's edge. The speeches were delivered, and the rituals performed, each step drawing them closer to the moment when the opposition would make their move. It happened just as the final part of the ceremony began. A faint tremor in the ground, a flicker of the lights, and then a sudden, blinding flash. A figure in the crowd cried out, accusing Daniel of sabotage, pointing to a hidden device that had been planted near the altar. Chaos erupted, and the hall filled with shouts and confusion. But Iliara was ready. She stepped forward, her voice ringing out above the chaos as she called for silence. Wait, she shouted, her tone commanding. This is not what it seems. She produced the evidence they had gathered, a detailed account of the conspiracy, the names of those involved, and the proof of their plot. The opposition leaders, caught off guard, tried to deny it, but the evidence was undeniable. The room fell silent as Iliara's words cut through the confusion, her authority unquestionable. Daniel stood by her side, his heart pounding as he watched the Varani's expressions shift from shock to realization. They had exposed the truth, but the outcome was still uncertain. The decision now lay in the hands of the people of Vatal, and Daniel held his breath, hoping that their efforts had been enough. Chapter 4. The Consequences of Trust. The Grand Hall was a cacophony of emotions: confusion, disbelief, anger, and a growing sense of realization. Iliara's voice, strong and resolute, echoed in the minds of all present as the evidence of the conspiracy was laid bare. Daniel's heart beat furiously, each second feeling like an eternity as the fate of his mission, and perhaps his life, hung in the balance. The opposition leaders, their faces pale and twisted with fury, attempted to shout down the accusations. They claimed lies, deceit, and manipulation, but Iliara stood her ground. Her presence, a beacon of authority and truth, silenced them one by one. The Varani officials looked to the ambassador Zarithra, who had remained silent until now, her silver eyes fixed on Daniel and Iliara with an expression that was impossible to read. Slowly, Zarithra rose from her seat at the center of the hall, her movements graceful and deliberate. She surveyed the room, taking in the evidence, the conspirators, and the crowd's shifting mood. When she spoke, her voice was calm yet carried the weight of absolute authority. It is clear, she said, that forces within our own ranks have sought to manipulate us, to drag us back into the shadows of our past. We stand on the cusp of a new era, and it is time to choose whether we embrace that future or retreat in fear. Her words were met with a murmur of agreement, and the opposition, realizing they had lost the favor of the people, retreated, their faces a mixture of defeat and humiliation. The crowd seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for Zarithra's next move. With a slow, deliberate gesture, Zarithra turned to Elyra, her expression softening. "You have shown great courage, Elyra, in exposing this conspiracy. You have demonstrated that the path forward requires trust, even when it is difficult." She then looked at Daniel, her gaze penetrating and unyielding. "And you, human, have proven that trust is not given lightly, but earned. You have faced our tests, our challenges, and our fears with sincerity. I have seen the bond you share with Elyra, a bond forged through adversity. The Varani do not forget those who have proven themselves worthy." The tension in the room dissipated, replaced by a feeling of relief and quiet triumph. Daniel felt a weight lift from his shoulders, and he allowed himself to exhale, his hand instinctively reaching for Elyra's. She took it, her fingers entwining with his, and he felt the warmth of her touch steady him in that moment of victory. The ceremony resumed, though now with a different tone, one of reconciliation and renewal. The false accusations were dismissed, and the crowd shifted from doubt to cautious acceptance. Daniel and Elyra stood together as the symbolic fires of renewal were lit, their flames dancing in a myriad of colors, reflecting the unity that was slowly being rebuilt. Over the following weeks, the political climate in Vatal transformed. The conspiracy was thoroughly investigated, and its members were brought to justice, their influence dismantled. Elyra was hailed as a hero among her people, and Daniel was no longer seen as an outsider but as a true ally, a symbol of the Federation's sincerity and the potential for a brighter future. Despite the success, Daniel knew his mission was far from over. He spent his days deepening the Federation's relationship with the Varani, learning more about their culture, their technology, and their history. Elyra was his constant partner in these efforts, her insights invaluable and her presence a source of strength. Together, they navigated the delicate web of politics, earning the trust of even the most skeptical officials. But as they worked side by side, Daniel found himself growing closer to Elyra in ways he hadn't anticipated. They shared late-night conversations in the gardens of the capital, exploring the depths of each other's cultures, their laughter echoing under the alien moons. There was a chemistry between them, a bond that transcended duty and diplomacy. Yet, Daniel hesitated to address it, knowing that such feelings could complicate the fragile peace they had fought to achieve. One evening, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the city now alight with the colors of the Vatal skyline, Elyra broke the silence that had settled between them. "Daniel," she said softly, "I never expected you to become so important to me. You've changed the way I see my people, my world, even myself." He turned to her, his eyes reflecting the glow of the city lights. "You've changed me too, Elyra. I came here as a diplomat, but I found more than I ever imagined. I found a friend, a teacher, and someone I care about deeply." Her gaze softened, and for a moment, they stood in silence, the unspoken words hanging in the air. Then she took a step closer, her hand reaching for his, just as she had done in the Hall of Echoes. This time, there was no confusion, no cultural barrier to navigate. It was a simple, human gesture, a connection that needed no translation. "Then stay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Stay on Vatal, not as a diplomat, but as yourself." Daniel's heart pounded, the weight of the decision heavy in his chest. He thought of Earth, of his duties to the Federation, and of the life he had known before. Yet, as he looked into Elyra's eyes, he knew that he had found something rare and precious, something that transcended borders and politics. He nodded, his answer clear. "I'll stay." From that moment on, Daniel's role on Vatal changed. No longer just a diplomat, he became a bridge between two worlds, an ambassador not of duty, but of understanding and friendship. The Federation's presence on the planet grew, and Vatal slowly opened itself to the galaxy, its people finding strength in unity rather than isolation. Years passed, and the transformation of Vatal became a symbol of hope throughout the galaxy. Daniel and Elyra's partnership, once seen as a curiosity, became a legend told in stories of how trust could heal old wounds and how love, in its many forms, could change the course of history. The renewal fires continued to burn each year, a reminder that even the deepest divides could be bridged. One night, as the two of them sat by the same fountain where Eliara had first revealed the secrets of her people. She rested her head on his shoulder and looked up at the stars. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come to Vatal?" she asked. Daniel smiled, his arm wrapping around her. "I try not to," he said softly, "because this is where I was meant to be." And as they watched the night sky filled with constellations that were once unfamiliar but had become home, Daniel knew that the bonds they had forged would endure, unbroken by time or distance. The Varani had become more than allies, and the stars above were no longer a vast unknown. They were a promise, a shared future that was brighter than either of them could have imagined.